Everyone, yes, we do have an interesting topic that is now becoming more controversial because one of the proposals that's on the table is going to be dealt with at the Commission hearing in April. So we'll talk about that, but we'll also, frankly, broaden the discussion into the whole difficulties faced by Canadian feature film and what's happening to the film industry. And I won't go through the CVs of all the players. That's in the material that has been provided by CMPA. I will just briefly introduce them as we get to them. But we only have an hour, so it won't be, I intend to have some opening questions and statements from each of them, and then I'd like to move to the floor, and I believe we will have a microphone available for anybody who wants to ask a question or make a comment. Okay, so I'll introduce the panelists as we get to them. And my first question will be to Patrick Roy, who's over here on the left. And Patrick is an interesting player now because, as you may know, he has been for many years working for Alliance Vivafilm in Montreal. And Alliance Films has recently been acquired by E1. So it's a big player these days in the distribution of feature films, both Canadian and independent films. And Patrick is now working for basically the Quebec division of E1, which is handling all of the Quebec distribution in all media of their library. I believe the name of the company now in Quebec is Seville, Film Seville.
Yeah, Film Seville.
So my question, starting with you, Patrick, is you are a distributor of Canadian and foreign independent films over all the platforms. What can you tell us about the current marketplace? And I'm particularly interested in any distinctions that there may be drawn between the Quebec market and the Canadian market, because you're familiar with both.
That's a big question. First, I don't think you'll be surprised if I say that things change really quickly in our business these days, and we have lots of challenges ahead of us, obviously. Every day we have to deal with new windows, new customers, basically a new reality every day. And it's the same reality, in fact, for English Canadian movies, Quebecois movies, or American movies. It's all the same thing. Our job as distributor is to make sure all of our movies, including Canadian movies, are seen by as many eyeballs as possible, and on all the different platforms. In recent years, we had to deal with the decrease of the DVD market. I was told that basically we're losing 6 to 8% every year since 2009. And we had to negotiate new deals with many new players like iTunes, Netflix, and more recently Videotron's Club à Volonté. Often people are doubtful that Canadian movies are available in all these new platforms, but they are. Because distributors are making sure that they are. So they are everywhere available for Canadians to see. Unfortunately, and it's funny, I think I was probably at this convention last time, probably 5 years ago, and I feel like it's a Groundhog Day because at the time I was complaining about the fact that conventional broadcasters were not buying Canadian movies, and it's still the case. And it's mostly a problem, I think, in English Canada. In Quebec, we have lots of support from the broadcasters, Super Écran, Radio-Canada, and now TVA is even buying more and more Quebecois movies. And often people will say we don't buy them because they don't work, but I think as a distributor, I think it's the opposite. In Quebec, what we've seen is that we have the support from these broadcasters for a long time now, and the more they show these movies, the more they work. And the more people we reach by showing these movies on television, the more they go see other movies, other Quebecois movies in theaters, and they rent them on DVD. So it has a positive effect for everybody. And I think, I hope that one day we'll find a solution and we'll make sure that we have the support from the English-Canadian conventional broadcasters to show these films. And it would be, it would have a huge impact. Just to give you an example, last year the biggest, that's wrong. Last year the biggest Quebecois movie in theaters was Omerta We reach in theaters approximately over 200,000 people in Quebec. But when this film will be shown on Radio-Canada, we'll probably reach an extra 750 people and maybe even more. So that's how we reach more people, and this is why we need better support from broadcasters to show these films.
Okay. Thank you, Patrick. I'm going to turn now to Robert Lantos. He will also be well known to most of you as one of Canada's foremost film producers, successful film producers in so many forms. And of course, Robert is now heavily involved in a proposal for a new service to be called Starlight, the Canadian Movie Channel. It's an application for what is technically known as a 91H service, which the Commission is having a hearing on in April. 91H in this context means that if the license is granted for this particular service, and there's some other applications also being considered, it would be offered on digital basic in English Canada. So people who are on the digital tier would automatically get the service, and the wholesale rate has been proposed at 45 cents a month. Starlight, though, is interesting because it's 100% Canadian content and 100% devoted to Canadian films. So, Robert, I'd like to ask you, can you give us a brief description of what Starlight is trying to accomplish?
I'm going to stand up.
Okay.
So, there's nothing new about the idea behind Starlight is not new. It was many years in the making. And it comes from my own personal and the industry's collective experience and frustration at finding ourselves in a unique position, not necessarily, but not a desirable unique position on the entire planet. Everywhere in the world that I have been, that I know of, where feature films are made, they are very heavily embraced and enthusiastically embraced by domestic broadcasters. They have their plays carved out in stone on the primetime schedules of the national networks, public and private. They are largely financed by broadcasters in France, in Germany, in Italy, in Spain, in Scandinavia, in Australia, pretty much wherever you turn. We stand alone in this very dubious privilege of having a very highly developed and advanced broadcast system in which feature films, domestic feature films, are essentially not welcome. They never have been. There's nothing new about this, but the situation is more acute now than it has ever been. For example, City TV was, among conventional broadcasters, sort of the flagship bearer for Canadian theatrical features. It screened about 20-25 a year. Since its new owners have taken possession, that's gone to zero. Showcase, a network that was my idea and which I used to own, but don't. Used to have 2 Canadian films a week. It has, which is over 100 airings a year, and now it has 0. Same goes for Bravo, History Channel. Well, CTV and Global never had any Canadian films, so they haven't changed. CBC used to have a stream of Canadian theatricals. It still does, but it's down from a dozen a year to 3 or 4. And wherever you look on the landscape, theatrical features are either not present, or if they are present, they tend to be around in the fringe hours of the day or late at night on channels that you can find around, if you get up to 600 or 700 on your dial. Pay television, which used to be exclusively about movies, no longer is. It's to a large extent about television series, which in that change, Canadian films have also become a much more marginal part of the pay television licenses than they used to be. So, since these are business decisions that broadcasters make, and they're entitled to, and if there's nothing regulatory preventing them from doing so, then they can certainly do whatever they want. And so over the years, since there has been no success and no headway made in persuading broadcasters to open their arms and embrace feature films, and I don't mean in odd hours and odd channels, but at 8 p.m. on the national networks, and contribute significantly with license fees towards the cost of making these films. And this really has been a battle that has never gone anywhere. Neither. Over time, sort of the thought occurred to my associates and I that the only real solution to this is, rather than try and force others to do that which they don't want to do, and they made it clear that they don't want to do, and they have their reasons. Let us form a permanent destination for Canadian theatrical feature films, a home for Canadian films, on the dial, in a place where they can reach every household and are available 24/7, and that's all that channel ever does. And so from there comes the idea of applying to the CRTC for a license to launch Starlight, that will be the sole purpose of Starlight, is the primary sort of central part of its schedule will be Canadian theatrical films, accompanied by feature documentaries and some television movies and shorts. And theatrical films will be presented in the way in which they were designed to be shown, with no commercial interruptions. So that's the genesis of Starlight. How much time do I have?
3 more minutes, that's all.
Surprisingly, or perhaps not surprisingly, there are those who don't think this is a great idea. And I mean, I shouldn't say surprisingly, because I found my whole, sort of ever since I first began making movies, there was again, we're unique in the planet of thinking this. It was a sense that our films are somehow inferior to the films made elsewhere, particularly Hollywood, since pretty much that's all that comes into Canada, other than during film festivals. And so somehow we always we should take back stage, because we're not as good. Everywhere in the world, people place highest priority on their own domestic stories. That comes first. And so the idea that Canadians, well, not Canadians, English Canadians, are somehow different from every other nation on the planet. They're the only ones who genuinely do not care about their own stories, their own history, their own humor, their own politics, their own world. They don't care. Everybody else does, but somehow we don't. It's false. It's nonsense. And I have 36 years of anecdotal evidence and have very heavy research that proves it. But it was like that from the beginning, from when I first started making movies. My first film, which was called In Praise of Older Women, when I tried to get movie theaters to book the film, the answer I got from the then head booker of the largest circuit of theaters in the country, who had not seen the film, was that he wasn't going to make any prime theaters available for it because the film was crap. And I said, how can you know it's crap? You haven't seen it. He said, it's Canadian. And that has, there was a time when Air Canada used to never show the Canadian film. American films only, good and bad ones. And it took me making a speech for which a lot of people were very upset by that during the Genie Awards, about that very fact that we have a national airline, which is the only national airline in the world, which shows films but not from its own country. Since then, Air Canada has been showing lots of Canadian films. When I had the idea for Showcase, the idea came from the fact that the conventional broadcasters were, as best they could, tucking their Canadian shows in offbeat hours, at sort of hours where they were least likely to be seen by audiences, so they could reserve their prime spots for simulcast American shows. And so, since that wasn't necessarily going to change, because simulcast was and remains sort of a staple of the business plan of broadcasters, the idea behind Showcase was we want to launch a channel that approaches this differently, which reserves 100% of prime time exclusively for Canadian drama, and tucks into sort of the off hours that which is not Canadian. The initial response to Showcase was, you are out of your mind, Canadians don't, no one's going to be interested in that, you're forcing things down consumer throats that they don't want. In other words, consumers don't want to see Canadian films or Canadian television shows. And the opposition came actually pretty much from same groups that are opposing Starlight today. But Showcase was licensed, and it was launched, and it became one of the highest rated specialty networks in the country. And it was actually, when I sold Alliance many years ago, and since then the company was resold. And in fact, one of the companies that doesn't think Starlight is a good idea currently owns Showcase and seems to be doing very well with it.
Okay, Robert, I think
I could go on, but I think overstaying my welcome.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Robert. There's more, I'm sure, to be said, but I want to give a bit of the floor to Pam Dinsmore, who is Vice President of Regulatory at Rogers, which of course owns City TV, but also is very heavily involved in the BDU side. And Pam, of course, the deadline for interventions, by the way, on all these 911H applications was last Wednesday. And looking at the list on the Commission's website, Starlight got about 910 positive interventions, but they did get 45 negative interventions, and including largely the cable industry and the satellite players and so on. So, Pam, obviously Rogers Cable is among those that has opposed, I think, all the 911H applications, not just Starlight. But can you outline the basis for that opposition?
Sure. I mean, I feel a bit like the skunk that came to the party, but I wasn't invited to be part of this panel. I'm excited to give you our perspective. But before I do that, I just want to set the record straight on City. City did have a condition of license to air 100 hours of Canadian feature films over the course of a year. That emanated from the early days when basically our mandate was to provide music, local, and movies. And once that was no longer the case, once Rogers bought City and it became a network and our programming focus changed, we asked to get out from under that condition of license. We still air Canadian feature films, and in fact are going to be providing the first broadcast window to Cairo Life, RPM, and High Life in the near future. So we still offer Canadian feature films, we just don't have the condition of license anymore for the reasons that I cited. The other correction I just want to make too is that Showcase, when it came into, when it was licensed as a discretionary service. So in that case, people had the option to either buy it or not, granted part of a package, that's how things are offered. But in this case, we're not talking about a discretionary service. We're talking about a service mandatory to basic that every customer of any cable or satellite service in this country will be required to get and to pay for as part of their subscription. So I just wanted to make that clear. Generally speaking, with 911H applications, the reason that we weighed in against them is that they're, in our view, completely at odds with the way the world is going. I mean, the fact that Canadians can now get what they want, when they want, how they want on any platform, that's not trite, it's true, it's what's going on out there. The fact is, customers are no longer a captive audience that can be taken for granted, which is pretty much how they were treated in the old days, and I'll admit to that. But today, customers can go wherever they want. They can stay with Rogers, they can remain our customers for their entertainment services, or they can choose to go elsewhere. I know people that are canceling their cable subscriptions, putting up a digital antenna and going to Netflix full-time, and they tell me that proudly at cocktail parties. So it is happening. So what have we done to try and keep our customers on the traditional platform? We've done things like bring in TV Everywhere, our authenticated TV product that allows customers to watch the content they're paying for on cable, both on the online platform and on mobile. We also did a fairly major trial last year in London, and we experimented with offering a skinny basic, getting rid of all these specialty services in the basic service, and then offering customers the opportunity to build their own packages of 10, 15, or 30 services out of a list of specialty services that now they could choose what they wanted. And we had very, very good response, and we had people come and choose that product who were not cable customers because we were offering an a la carte type solution with a small basic. So we can't stand in the way of our customers. What we need to do is listen to what they're telling us, and try and satisfy them, because as long as our customers remain with us, the whole system benefits. It's not just about cable, it's about every player in the system. Even then, we're seeing customers reduce their, the amount of services they're taking from us, and we are seeing our overall net basic base go down altogether at the rate of about 1% a year. So this growing percentage of people who are leaving us, when we ask them, why are you leaving us? They say, I had to come back, I kept back in order to save money. And they say, I decided internet video was a better option. So we're hearing that directly from our customers. I'm not making this up, it is for real. Now, is OTT really a threat? I want you just to look at this chart for a second, because it tells a very interesting story about our video rental business. Many people are arguing that, in fact, over-the-top providers are simply complementary to cable. They are not competing with us, and they're not taking our customers away. This slide tells an interesting story in this regard, because what it shows you is the rise and fall from the year 2000 till the year 2012 of our video rental business. So as you can see, we continue to make substantial revenues between 2000 and 2005, and we introduced our VOD product, Video on Demand, in 2002. And contrary to what people were inside the company were saying, both businesses took hold and did rather well until 2005, which was sort of the point at which the VOD business started to overtake our video rental business, and you can see how the video rental business starts falling off, going down the hill and then off the cliff altogether, and then we closed all the stores in 2012. So the cautionary tale here is that when new disruptive businesses come in contact with traditional businesses, the end isn't always at the very beginning. The end may take some time to come, but when it does come, it can come fairly quickly and quite drastically. So in our view with these 91H applications, we also oppose them because we don't think any of them meet the CRTC stringent test. And it's important to say that the Commission has a very strict test by which any of these services must prove themselves. Again, at the time where the Commission has got a mantra of requiring us to provide our customers with more programming choice and flexibility, and at a time when the Commission is looking at every application through a consumer lens, we don't think it's the time to be taking or to putting any of these services on basic and requiring our customers to pay for them unless they're got a public service mandate and the programming that they are providing is absolutely unique in the system. None of the services meet this test, which brings me to Starlight. First of all, I just want to say that Rogers is a huge supporter of Canadian feature film in this country. We have invested over $400 million in Canadian production writ large since the inception of our funds. And we also now provide the new $100,000 annual prize, the Toronto Critics Prize, that went to Sarah Polley this year for Stories We Tell. So with this long track record, you may wonder, why is Rogers opposing the Starlight application? Well, first of all, going back to that statement I just made before, in our view, the programming that Starlight plans to offer is not unique. I mean, if you look at the existing pay services, they all have the conditions of license or that require exhibition and expenditures on Canadian programming, specifically Canadian feature film. And in this light, I'll just read what the Movie Network has on its website. It says, Canadian feature film licensing. The Movie Network is one of the largest pre-licensors and private investors in Canadian feature films in English Canada. We pre-buy approximately 40 films per year and acquire an additional 20 or so more. We support films from across the country, from big-budget theatrical feature films to low-budget films for first-time directors, feature-length documentaries, and commercially driven made-for-TV movies. I think that speaks for itself, certainly in respect of the of TMN. Beyond these English language pay services, there are obviously specialty channels. Robert mentioned Showcase. There are others that have movies, feature films at the core of their mandate, and Canadian expenditure and exhibition requirements. But I want to tell a little story now about video on demand, because Rogers offers video on demand, as do most cable companies. And our video on demand service has an obligation, a CRTC obligation, to have in our inventory every Canadian feature film out there. In the last year and a half, we added 600 Canadian feature film titles to our VOD library, and our buy rates are impressive. Basically, our customers, for every 9 foreign films our customers order and watch, one of those films is Canadian. So the Canadian films are holding their own in our inventory, And at least half of our digital customer base is actively using our video-on-demand product. And let's not forget, the money that the VOD service gets from Canadian feature films goes directly back to the rights holders. So I would argue that between pay, specialty, and video-on-demand services, the broadcasting system itself has not abandoned feature film, that there are definitely feature films available to Canadians that choose to watch them, and they are not unique in terms of the 91H test. I would also suggest that Starlight very simply and very easily could operate as a discretionary movie service, as many others out there are doing already. Why Starlight should get the leg up over existing movie services is a mystery to me. And our research, we did research, I know that Starlight also did research, but we did research in the context of 91H services. But we found, even at that 31% of Canadians would support some form of Starlight-type service. So in that respect, no question there is some support. It's not enough to warrant 91H status, but certainly there would be, no doubt, people who would subscribe to Starlight if it chose to launch as a discretionary service. Finally, we don't see any valid public policy reason that Canadian cable customers and satellite customers should be footing the bill for Starlight's film studio. We believe that if the government, be it provincial or federal, thinks that there is some lacune, some problem with the Canadian feature film industry, then the existing subsidies, the tax credits, telefilm, those sorts of things should be topped up in order to deal with that problem. But it should not be a problem fixed on the backs of Canadian cable customers. And I think that just to pull this back into the broader picture, we all benefit from customers remaining on the traditional system. It's how the contribution works, it funds the CMF, funds the films that you guys make, the broadcasters air. So to the extent that customers choose to leave us, that's to the detriment of everybody in this room. So that's our argument, and thank you for hearing me out.
Thank you very much. Our fourth speaker is Victor Loewy. Now, Victor is also, I should say, a potential shareholder in the Starlight application, but he is first and foremost a film distributor, now retired because he was, of course, running Alliance Films before it was sold to E1. So he has actually an unparalleled experience in film distribution, both Canadian films and independent films. So first of all, Victor, any comments on what you've heard up to this point, but also I'm interested, of course, in what Pam had to say about the demise of the DVD market, and that certainly has been noticeable both on the English and French side. Has video on demand managed to rise to a state where it supplants the revenues that you see in the DVD sale and rental market as it used to be? What is the situation happening in this area?
Well, let me first start by saying, Pam, that I started in this business selling films to Phil and Ted Rogers for their hotel pay TV business. So I go back a really long time, and I heard some of the arguments that I heard from you today that I'm reading about in the press. I heard them then. They haven't changed in the 40 years that I've been in business. It was the same arguments, unchanged. They're just refined. Why force people to do this or that? The same reason why Rogers is forcing people to buy Sportsnet and all the other channels in their basic package, even though 90% or 80% of people don't want to watch it, and they have already the one provided by the Bell services. If there's so much choice, why not just let us choose? Why do we have to buy? Why are we forced? In terms of, Peter, to go back to the original question, there's no question that home video is, as Patrick Roy said, home video has been falling off at a very rapid clip. Starting this past Christmas, it has accelerated drastically, and it has probably fallen by an additional 25%. So it's very hard to predict what the drop will be for the entire year. It could be quite dramatic. What people here, what we in the business had hoped is that all this will be replaced by by iTunes and services of that kind. There's a big uptake in iTunes, but not at the same rate and as home video was, and certainly the pricing of iTunes is much lower, especially the rental, than when people were either renting or buying DVDs to keep and collect. So that is an enormous amount of revenue that has been lost to the business, which is not going to be replaced. We're talking a lot about VOD. The reality, and I sort of anecdotally chatted with Pam about it at lunch. The reality is that for most consumers, it is very, very hard to access video on demand on most services because the technology involved and all the steps that you have to go through to buy a VOD title. It's not like an iTunes experience where you just go there and just press buy, you already have the thing. You have to go to a certain channel, you have to know what it is, it's not properly advertised. I bet you if I ask people here who, if they know on what channel VOD is from their local provider, nobody has a clue. In some providers in Western Canada have legacy boxes only. Shaw, for instance, is selling still legacy boxes. If you want to order one of the newer boxes, you have to make a special order. If you go to one of their stores or to Best Buy, they're selling legacy boxes which can only hold 30 titles in their memory. So to say that there's a VOD possibility and that Canadians can go and rent films on VOD and rent Canadian films on VODs is a myth, and it's not true. It's not doable, all right? Now, the only province and the only company that has done it and is tackling this is Videotron in Quebec, which has noticed that this was the case. They actually went to a manufacturer and they said, I want you to do this and this, and they gave them the specs, and the new boxes that they're rolling out are built to those specifications so that everybody eventually will be able to access that. But who knows when it's going to happen. Certainly not happening in English Canada, to my knowledge. In terms of Netflix, we hear a lot of talk about Netflix in this country. Some of us went to the Banff event a few days ago in Toronto, when a person who runs CTV told the audience and told everybody to hear very loud and clear, yes, Netflix is a big success in Canada, but it has not led to a single customer leaving their services. No, not one. His quote from him, not one. Hasn't affected this, hasn't affected the viewing habits of people. It's an additional, it's something else. Netflix is a different mix of things than anything else that's being offered. What nobody is saying really, it's only $8. It's not $64, which is the average cost of a Canadian cable package so that you can actually start watching. It's $8. So, but this has not changed any reality really in terms of the economics of Canadian movies. It hasn't changed. It hasn't changed the fact that there's no place for people to go right now and watch a Canadian film of their choice. They can't. They just can't. I mean, the CTV, I can tell you because I had fights when the City TV license was granted through to Rogers. The Canadian films were stopped the same day, before any change of license, before any demand. They were just taken off the air. This has never been replaced by anything. There is a need. There's a lot of films being made every year. We cannot watch them. We cannot watch them, and they cannot generate any revenues for the producers and for the distributors. Therefore, the entire industry is impacted. And this is what the beauty of Starlight will be. And I think that also the investment the channel will make in production, which is another discussion.
Okay, thank you. Well, Pam, I know you probably want to rebut that. There's one point that I did hear in your own presentation, though, that was to me interesting, and that was your recounting of the London experiment, where people did have a chance to choose. But I did look at the Rogers website the other day just to find out what is on Digital Basic. And it is true to say that you cannot, at this point, according to your website, if you're in Toronto or Ottawa or the Rogers Rogers cable systems, you can't buy digital basic without also being included all the Sportsnet channels. Now, in fairness, Bell is offering digital basic, and guess what? They don't have Sportsnet on their basic tier, but they do have TSN. And in fact, there was an intervention filed by the Weather Channel which pointed out that there's a bunch of services on digital basic that are there not because the Commission required them to be there, but simply because it meant it was useful for the owner of the BDU to have them there. And so, are you suggesting, though, that Rogers will move to now a different environment? Because that would be quite a change.
Is this on? Yeah. Well, the London trial was something that we really wanted to do to test whether there was an appetite out there for an offering which would be offered alongside our existing offering, because on digital you can do 2 different offerings to customers, and they can go either path. So the London trial was all about testing whether or not customers found it attractive to pay like $19 for a small basic that was only 918 services and over-the-air TV services, taking all the specialties out, and then putting them all in a list, which then the customer could choose if they wanted that you pick 10.
Right.
Yeah. So, in a way, the problem for us was that we couldn't get all of those who owned the channels to participate. So there were holdouts that did not want to be part of it, ergo it could only remain a trial. It could never go to full rollout, because if you can't have every channel available, it doesn't work. That said, the people that got it, those that chose to subscribe to it, thought it was great. It was all in, cheaper. I think at the $30 mark for the largest package, it became sort of a wash as to whether you probably got more if you stayed with your existing package than if you went with the small basic and picking the larger pack. Just to talk about, the difference with Starlight is that it would be mandatory basic carriage on every satellite and cable service across the country.
Well, just digital.
So, on digital.
Yeah.
So if Rogers carries Sportsnet on digital and Bell doesn't, Rogers Sportsnet doesn't have the same status as a Starlight would or a 918 service would. We look at the Weather Channel, and it's great because they're a specialty service. They're offered on every system across the country. If we want to understand the decline in, or the cord cutting, we talk behind closed doors to Pelmax and say, to Weather Channel, and say, how are you falling off in terms of subscribers? Because they're the ones that are the canary in the coal mine. They can tell us. But Sportsnet's not carried by every cable company or satellite company in the country on the basic service. That would be what Starlight would achieve if it had digital basic service.
But Sportsnet is being carried by Rogers Cable on the digital basis.
Yes, it is.
Yeah. Robert, did you want to say something?
I do. I listened very attentively to the panel, and you seem like a very nice person. Job. So, but which built its empire with a forked tongue and continues to speak with that forked tongue. On the one hand, it is very, very strong against competition. It has managed, with the help of regulations, to protect its turf, to not let in foreign competition, to keep the American giants out of this country, and to keep American programming from invading Canada lock, stock, and barrel, on the grounds that Canada needs to have its own voice, and the airwaves need to belong to Canadians, so we can have, it's part of being a nation, and they're part of being a fabric of a nation, which I agree with fully. But, on the other hand, when it comes to fulfilling what comes with being the fabric of the nation, which is making it the #1 priority to tell the stories of the nation, when it comes to that, that is best resolved by donating to charities. By the way, I'm all for that, whether it's the Toronto Film Critics or any number of film festivals or schools, by all means. I do that too. But that's not an alternative or a replacement. That's just handing out a nickel here, a dime there, in order to avoid the central mission based on which the broadcast system in this country and the cable companies receive their protective, quasi-monopolistic licenses to do business. Now, you talk about churn and cord cutting. Well, hey, welcome to the world of competition. You actually have to compete for the first time in your business lives. I think it's a very healthy thing. But it is not an alibi for essentially reneging on the very reason why you have been granted privileged status for decades and decades. Now, I'm not going to have enough time to refute every single statement that you made, and you are a nice person, and you're very articulate, and you say what you say with a great deal of preparation and thought. However, the amount of spinning, and forgive me, outright fabrication, in the numbers you use is quite extraordinary. Well, let me start with this, since I just mentioned the word numbers. You work for a very successful company. You talk about cord cutting, and you talk about declining revenues and declining audiences. Well, you do charge them $65 a month, and this little service that we're talking about, Starlight, is talking about 45 cents. It would really be surprising to me if by going to $65.45, you're going to make a substantive difference in the mindset of your subscribers. It might be $65 that's doing it. But you know, Rogers' operating revenue last year was $12,846 million. Operating income before taxes was $2,766 million. I don't quite feel sorry for you yet. Okay, you have ways to go. You know, the Rogers CEO over the last 3 years made a little over $30 million. Last year, $13,687,000. Now, I think he's welcome to it. I applaud him. But, you know, we can't be talking here about 45 cents a month because we want to offer Canadian movies into every Canadian home 24/7. Now, the idea that they're available on VOD is, you know, I can't let that go. There are 6 movies as of Saturday. I don't know what you've done since. Perhaps you've changed it in preparation for today. As of Saturday, if you went onto Rogers, VOD, there were only 6 Canadian movies you could possibly choose from. Not 600, 6. So, and they were charged, they were $3.99 a piece. $4 for one movie. Our idea is to offer 700 movies a year for 45 cents a month, which is less than a penny each. That's the idea. So, you know, the rest of this we'll get into at the CRTC hearing, and boy, I can't wait. But let me say what you talked about the movie network being the solution for Canadian films. Well, take a close look at the statistics that the movie network itself publishes when it files for with the CRTC. Because the movie network's showing of Canadian films over the past 5 years has declined by 66%. Now, they are showing Canadian programming, and there's nothing in their condition of license that says it has to be feature films. They have replaced feature films by series. Like I said when I talked earlier, I don't have a problem with that. I mean, I do, but it's their call, it's their network, they can do whatever they like. But they have declined the showing of theatrical Canadian films by 66% over the last 5 years, according to their own filings. Now, but even if they were showing every Canadian film ever made in the heart of prime time, they only reach 15% of Canadian households. The other 85%, no. And they charge 20, 30 bucks over and above your 65. Well, you get a piece of that 20 or 25. So that is not going to work for the vast majority of the population. 45 cents is a much better chance of working. So we are going to do something no one has ever done in Canadian television if we get licensed. And in order to do it, we actually have to get mandatory license, at least at the initial period when we're launching the network. We're going to take 70 cents of every dollar that comes in, gross revenues, and reinvest it into Canadian programming, specifically Canadian feature film. The vast majority of it will go into financing new films. You thought that there was something wrong with our model as to how we're going to finance feature films. You called it a studio. It's not, well, you know, that's a spin. The idea is to finance films and focus on emerging filmmakers who have trouble getting their films made. As Telefilm Canada is moving more and more towards financing commercial films with international markets, which I believe is what they should do, and it is what they're doing. The entry-level films, the $2, $3, $4 million movies by filmmakers who have not yet proven that we don't yet have a commercial track record, is where there is the greatest vacuum, and it is where we lose the vast majority of young talent in this country coming out of film schools who want to make movies and have a great deal of trouble getting in, and so they move to other places, you know, like Los Angeles. And so we're going to take 70 cents of every dollar. Now take a look at any other broadcasting service in this country. First of all, no one puts 70% of anything into Canadian programming. But Canadian feature films, well, look at the movie network. It's called the Movie Network. 3% of its revenue is going to Canadian feature films. And you said Rogers invested $400 million in Canadian films? Canadian production, but we're here to talk about feature films. Television series are very important, and they're doing really well right now. We're not here to talk about them. We're here to talk about feature films. Well, I've made 36 feature films in my life. And I used to run a company called Alliance, which was distributing hundreds of them. Never once did Rogers invest a single penny in any of them. So I don't know where you put that money, but it sure isn't in feature films, so don't say it is. No, you said it's programming, but we're here to talk about feature films. That's, you know, I know when it's convenient, you can reach somewhere else and sort of try and slip it by, so it sounds like you put $400 million into feature films, but you haven't put a dime. You say $400 million into Canadian television series, or documentaries, perhaps, I don't know if you have you know, film festivals and film schools, and you know, then you're sticking closer to the truth. But donating $100,000 here and $50,000 there is not an alternative to discharging the fundamental reason why you have a protected license to do business in this country. I could go on, but as I said, I'll reserve the rest for the court that truly matters. See you there.
Robert? We're largely out of time, but I must give Pam poor, pushed upon Pam, but Pam, I do want you to give you a chance. And I'm afraid we won't probably have time for discussion from the floor because we are out. Pam, would you like to add a few thoughts?
Listen, I appreciate the flattering comments, and the first thing I'd like to say is I wish I had been a fly on the wall at Phil Lynn's breakfast with Robert Lantos, but unfortunately I was not invited. You know, it's a couple things, just a few things. Right now, last I checked, there are 193 Canadian feature films in our inventory. So the 6 films obviously have got some issues with navigation, but they're all there.
I told you so.
As Piak said, because Victor doesn't have a next box, and if Victor had a next box and an iPad, his navigation of our VOD product would be a whole
Yeah, I have iPad.
PIAC, the Public Interest Advocacy Center, which represents consumers, they said that the 45 cents, which Starlight is saying is not, you know, it's not material. 45 cents, what's 45 cents? The problem is that you're dealing with it in isolation of anything else. What you fail to recognize is at this hearing there are 16 applications for 918 services. There are equally applications on the part of existing licensees to have rate increases. So you can talk about your 45 cents in isolation, but in fact this hearing could add as much as $3 without any markup to a cable bill. So that is what it is.
Take out the sports services.
Lastly, I just want to talk about, now we're raising the notion of Nadir's salary, and you know, Nadir earns his salary, but I know that Robert will also earn his salary at this, with this channel. He's going to take $1 million a year into his own pocket, as far as I understand.
How am I doing that?
That's what I understand. That's my management fee.
Where did you get that?
I got it from good sources.
You just made it up.
I got it.
You made up the rest.
I got it from good sources.
But you just made it up.
Don't get emotional with me. Don't
It's
get
nowhere in
emotional
our
with me.
material.
Anyway, I rest my case. So,
Okay. You're not as nice as I thought you were.
Well, I think we're ending this on a high note. I mean, I don't think an event, I've chaired a number of these panels, and I always like to have the Robert show for the obvious reasons, but Pam, you did very well. And Rogers, and I think she needs an ovation too. So ladies and gentlemen, that concludes our session. It will resume, of course, on April 23rd, when Starlight and the other applications, and Pam is quite correct, there's how many, 14 or 16 others. Some are existing services that, as she said, want a small increase, but there's, I think, about, is it 8 new ones?
Yes,
Yeah.
there's 16 applications.
And when you total them all up, it is close to $3 in terms of wholesale rates. But of course, I think in fairness, nobody expects all of those applicants to win a license. And all of this will be dependent on the hearing in front of the commission. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you will join me in thanking our panel.